In Albion Online, helmets aren't just armor pieces. They are some of the strongest tools. They carry one of the most important active abilities in your build, and the right one can decide an entire fight, sometimes before your weapon even matters. Some helmets cleanse debuffs or save you from huge damage. Others shut down enemies by purging buffs, interrupting channels, or even resetting your whole kit. But the truth is, there is no single best helmet. It all depends on how you play, what you're fighting, and what your build is actually trying to solve. So in this video, I'm going to break down every helmet in Albion Online. Not just what they do, but when they work, why they matter, and how to pick the one that fits your build. Whatever content you play in Albion, this guide will help you understand the real impact of your helmet beyond the tooltip. Before we dive into each helmet one by one, there are a few things you should absolutely know about helmets in Albion, especially if you are newer, returning, or just never really looked under the hood. First, all helmets in Albion, whether they're cloth, leather, or plate, give the same base defensive stats. That catches a lot of players off guard. You'd expect plate helmets to be tankier and cloth ones to be squishier, but that's not how it works in this game. In Albion, the armor type of the helmet doesn't affect your defenses at all. What really matters is the ability the helmet gives you, and that's the only reason to pick one helmet over another when building your setup. What does change your helmet stats is its item power. That's affected by the helmet's tier, enchantment, quality, whether it's an artifact and the type of artifact, along with your masteries and specialization levels, both in that specific helmet and in others from the same tree. Those levels actually boost the item power of related helmets, even if you're not using that exact piece. So what stats are affected by item power? You're looking at max health, max energy, health regeneration, and energy regeneration, and that's it. These base stats stay the same no matter what type of helmet you're wearing. They simply scale through item power. So first up, let's talk about passive abilities, because each helmet line, plate, leather, and cloth, comes with its own set. These aren't major decision makers when picking a helmet, but they do give your build a little extra flavor. Plate helmets give you toughness, which boosts your defenses, authority, which increases your crowd control duration, and tenacity, which helps you resist crowd control yourself. Leather hoods offer more hybrid style passives, like Balanced Mind, which gives you a bit of everything, damage, healing cost, and defenses, Swiftness, which speeds up your auto attacks, and Quick Tinker, which reduces your cooldowns. Then cloth cowls lean more into spellcasting passives, Aggression for bonus damage and healing cost, Concentration, which reduces cast times, and Efficiency, which lowers your energy costs. Now, even though these passives roughly match the theme of the armor type, tanky for plate, hybrid for leather, caster for cloth, you still don't pick a helmet just for the passive. The active ability on your helmet is way more impactful, and that's what you should always base your choice on. Think of the passive as a bonus, not the main reason you're using the piece. There's a second distinct feature that comes from your helmet's armor line. And unlike passives, this one can actually influence which line you choose. And that's because each helmet line has its own global active ability. All plate helmets have Stone Skin, which increases your defenses. All leather hoods have Cleanse, which removes all crowd control effects and debuffs from you and all allies within the circle. And all cloth cowls have Force Field, which damages and knocks back all enemies around you. And some of these abilities are actually very popular and widely used, specifically Cleanse and Force Field. So keep these global abilities in mind when choosing your helmet skill. They can play a huge role in your setup. Aside from every helmet in Albion having its own unique ability, and each helmet tree line having a global ability, there is also one final ability that can be found on every helmet within the game, regardless of armor line. And that's the Energizing Shield ability, which grants you a shield and restores a portion of your missing energy. It's just a really useful ability to have access to, especially for builds that might run into trouble with energy sustain or tougher PvE bosses. So remember, on every helmet within the game, you have access to 3 different active abilities you can swap between anytime you need to. Now that you've learned absolutely everything you need to know about helmets in general, let's move on to every helmet within the game, what makes them unique, what they're good for, and when you typically want to use them. If you found the video helpful so far, please give it a like so it can reach more Albion Online players. Let's get into the first helmet. Timestamps are listed below, so feel free to jump around or revisit specific ones whenever you need. And just a heads up, from this point forward, I'll be explaining each helmet live, the way I would if we were sitting together in-game. Let me know in the comments if you find this style helpful. I always appreciate the feedback. Alright, let's get started with the first helmet category. We're starting with Purges. There are 2 helmets in the Purge category. We have the Fiend Cowl and we have the Helmet of Valor. So if you want a Purge in your build and you want it through your helmet slot, these are the only 2 options you have available to you. Now, if you don't know what Purges do, they remove positive buffs on the enemy. So as you can already imagine, it's a very strong utility to have in your kit. The Fiend Cowl is different from the Helmet of Valor, in that the Fiend Cowl is a single target ability, and unlike the Helmet of Valor, it's not a skill shot. This is what the Fiend Cowl looks like. You can cast it from range, it will follow the target, and it will connect. And once it has connected, all positive buffs on the enemy will be removed. So think about stuff like the heroic strike charges that the swords build up that make for extra attack speed. Think of stuff like Cleric robes, Mercenary jacket, even stuff like sprints. Anything positive that's considered a buff will be removed through Purges. To showcase another ability, the Robe of Purity has energy emission, which makes for damage, which grants them immunity against forced movement effects, and even knocks all enemies back. As soon as they pop this ability, you can get rid of it with one of these 2 helmets. The second Purge helmet, Helmet of Valor, has more to it than just the Purge. Not only does it purge all enemies hit by it, but it also cleanses all crowd control effects and debuffs on you and your allies. So if you get CC'd through a stun whatsoever, if you get slowed, or if you are affected by a negative debuff, such as the Fearless Strike, which makes for armor 10, like this, you can cleanse it with the Helmet of Valor as well. The Helmet of Valor is quite a big AoE that has quite some range to it, and multiple people can be hit at the same time, and it will apply both the positive on you and your allies, and the negative on the enemies by removing their buffs simultaneously. So it's a very strong helmet. Now, one thing you need to know about Purge is that it's a PvP exclusive ability. You don't have any value in PvE, so never take this in your PvE setup whenever you go about creating your build. It's strictly for PvP, where the Fiend Cowl is typically used in ganking, it's used in 1v1 content and 2v2 content, and beyond that, you don't really see the Fiend Cowl, because the Helmet of Valor takes over once you are talking about party sizes of 3v3 or higher, all the way up to 10v10, and even in 1v1 and 2v2, the Helmet of Valor is used as well. So choose wisely whether you want to go with the guaranteed hit, which is the Fiend Cowl, or you want to go with the skill shot that makes for more than just a purge, which is the Helmet of Valor. The second category of helmets are the damage helmets. There we have the Mage Cowl, the Cowl of Purity, and the Cultist Cowl. These are helmets you primarily take because they add damage to your build. Starting with the Mage Cowl, it has Fire Breath, which is as simple and straightforward as an ability can get. It basically fires a cone in front of you, which does damage over time. Looks like this, and that's all it does really. It just makes for more damage in your build through your helmet. Then you have the Cowl of Purity, which has the Avalonian Beam on it. Now the Avalonian Beam also makes for extra damage in your build through your helmet. But this one actually has an additional use on it, which is that it interrupts enemy spell casting. So whenever someone is casting an ability that can be interrupted, you can use the Avalonian Beam to cancel them. The Avalonian Beam also has far more range on it, so it's a really good tool to poke enemies as well and keep them in combat. And then we have the Cultist Cowl, which is the third damage ability. Unlike the other two, this one is a single target ability. The Inner Corruption ability does different things based on whether you use it in PvE or whether you use it in PvP. In PvE, it will do a fixed amount of damage over the 4 seconds it lasts for. In PvP, however, it's more of a pressure, debuff type of ability, because as soon as you cast the Inner Corruption on a target, they will receive damage with every auto attack they do or every ability they use. Looks like this, it has quite some range to it, and it's recognized by this reddish aura people will have around them. So if someone casts this ability on you, you either want to get rid of it through a cleanse, such as the Helmet of Valor, or you want to make sure you don't attack until this ability is over. Now, when do you use these three different helmets? The Mage Cowl is typically used in solo PvE content, whenever you roam the open world and you go about killing packs of mobs, or perhaps something like solo dungeons. But outside of that, the Cowl of Purity quickly takes over. I would also say the Mage Cowl, although it can be used in PvP, the Cultist Cowl and the Cowl of Purity are far superior options, so the Mage Cowl is pretty limited in its use. The Cowl of Purity is used in a lot of different content, in solo PvP, duo PvP, 3v3, 5v5, not only because it makes for additional damage, but also because it has interrupts, so it can interrupt strong abilities, but also clutch moments where healers try to get their last big heal in, you can interrupt those as well. The Cultist Cowl is typically used in 1v1 PvP content only. So in Corrupted Dungeons you will see it, in Mists you will see it as well, and you will also see all three of these abilities in the open world as well. The third category of helmets is healing, and there is only one helmet in the game that makes for a heal, and that's the Graveguard helmet, which has the Sacrifice ability, which is an ability you cannot cast on yourself, but only on your allies. Whenever you cast this ability, you take 15% of your max health as true damage, so it's a fixed 15%. But on the other hand, you heal your ally for a base minimum of 25%, which is affected and boosted or buffed by bonuses in your kit, such as those through your armor, which make for more healing cost. If you want a big burst heal on your helmet slot, the Graveguard helmet is your only option. And it's used typically in PvE content such as group dungeons, where you play with a group and the tank takes a lot of aggro and damage, and you need access to something that can top them up real fast with a lot of burst healing. In PvP, it's used as well, starting from 2v2 all the way to 5v5 content. Beyond that, you don't really see the Graveguard helmet. So think of stuff like the Depths and the Hellgates. The third category of helmets are the ones that make for resets. In that category, we have the Assassin Hood and we have the Specter Hood. Whenever you use the Assassin Hood, you will channel an ability that will reset your cooldowns by a certain amount. When fully cast, it will reset about 15 seconds of your abilities. So just to showcase you, if I use my boot here, my armor and my E, you can see my armor has about 33 seconds cooldown right now. I can cast my helmet like this and it will reset to about 15 seconds. So about 15 seconds when you get a full channel in. Which means that it is vulnerable against interrupts, such as the Cowl of Purity, which I just covered, which makes for an interrupt. So you need to be aware of crowd control whenever you use this ability. And you can also cancel it earlier if you need to. Let's say you have only 5 seconds remaining on your boots and you really need to have access to your boots straight away. Just use it for a second and interrupt it. Now, the Assassin Hood is a very popular item that's used in a lot of different content, all the way from 1v1 to the biggest ZVZ contents that are 100 versus 100 or even bigger. It really depends on what kind of build you use and whether you need a reset in your kit. It's useful in both PvE and PvP content. Then we have the Specter hood, which is the second helmet in the game that makes for a reset. Now this one works very different from the Assassin hood, because this one doesn't reset your entire kit, and you don't need to channel it either. What the Specter hood does is it resets your armor's ability fully. So let's say you use your armor like this and you use your helmet, it's instantly reset. So if you have an armor that has a strong effect, such as the Mercenary jacket, and you really want to emphasize on the ability of your armor, the Specter hood is an excellent helmet to take with your build. The Specter hood is both viable in PvE and PvP content, but it does serve a niche use. So take it whenever you want a reset on your armor. Next up, we have the debuff category. And in that category, we have the Stalker hood and we have the Hood of Tenacity. Starting with the Hood of Tenacity, we have the Nasty Wounds ability on it. Now when you use the Nasty Wounds ability, you summon an AoE around you that looks like this, which does damage to everyone that's in it. But more importantly, the debuff of this helmet makes for a 50% reduction in both healing received and healing cast. So as soon as someone gets in contact with this ability, they receive a huge debuff to healing. The Hood of Tenacity is not an item you want to take with you in PvE content, because mobs typically don't make for healing, so you don't need this debuff. As for the damage, it's very minor. In PvP, however, it can be used across all the different contents. Sometimes whenever healing is very meta in places like the Mists or the Corrupted Dungeons, you can take the Hood of Tenacity there as well. But outside of that, it's typically used in group content and in bigger fights within Albion Online. The second helmet in Albion Online that makes for a debuff is the Stalker hood. Now the Stalker hood does multiple things at the same time. First of all, it increases your damage by 15% for 4 seconds whenever you use it. It also reveals all invisible enemies hit by it. So if someone used an invisibility potion or an assassin jacket next to you, you can use this helmet to reveal them straight away. The Stalker hood has a third perk to it, which is that once you use it on enemies below 50% health, they will have their resistances reduced by a huge amount, which will make the most tankiest people even very squishy once they are below 50% health and you use this ability correctly. The Stalker hood is a very popular item that's used in both PvE and PvP across a lot of different contents. If you are doing solo farm, group farm, if you are doing group PvP, solo PvP, as long as you need this resistance debuff, or if you need to reveal enemies, such as when you are ganking, the Stalker hood is a very solid option. Up next, we have the category that makes for energy sustain in your build. There we have the Royal Cowl, the Druid Cowl, and the Scholar Cowl. Starting with the Royal Cowl, which makes for a buff that reduces your energy cost to 0 for 15 seconds. And since the cooldown of it is 30 seconds, you'll basically have 0 energy cost for half the time whenever you use the Royal Cowl in your build. Looks like this, and as you can see, none of my abilities are costing energy any longer. If you need a very solid energy source in your build, the Royal Cowl is a very good pick to take. The Royal Cowl is an item that's viable in both PvE and PvP content. You'll typically see it in group PvE content such as group dungeons or Avalonian raids. Basically content where you need to use abilities non-stop. As for PvP, it can be used there as well, typically in content where there are pretty long fights. The second helm that makes for an energy source is the Druid Cowl. And unlike the Royal Cowl, which is for yourself only, the Druid Cowl makes for an energy source for you and all of your allies. So whenever you use this ability, you place an energy pool on the ground, and whoever stands in it will have their energy regained. So this is a very good item if you want to cover the energy sustain team-wide. Now, because the Druid Cowl's ability forces you to stand on it, it's not a very reliable ability to use in PvP, because people will be kiting throughout PvP fights and the battle might just move somewhere else within a matter of seconds. So it's typically used in PvE content, but that doesn't mean you cannot use it in PvP. You can, but it's just not that reliable. The third helmet that makes for an energy source in Albion Online is the Scholar Cowl, which again only affects you, and aside from making for an energy source, it also increases your armor and your magic resistances, so it makes you tanky as long as the buff is ongoing as well. Now there is one condition to the Scholar Cowl, which is that in order to regain energy, you need to take damage. So you need to make sure you get hit, and for every hit you take, you gain a portion of your energy. The Scholar Cowl can be used in both PvE and PvP, as it makes for a lot of extra defenses as well on top of the energy source, and it's typically used in 1v1 up to 5v5 content. Beyond that, other abilities typically take over when it comes to energy sustain. Then we have the 7th category of helmets, which are the helmets that make for defenses, such as the Soldier Helmet, Guardian Helmet, Cleric Cowl, and Mistwalker Hood. Starting with the Soldier Helmet, you have the block ability on it, and this is one of the most popular helmets out there when it comes to defenses. Whenever you use the block ability, you become immune to all incoming damage and crowd control effects as well. Now the Soldier Helmet is a channel, so you cannot use other abilities whilst using the block ability, but you can still move whilst using it. Now this is a very popular helmet for transporters especially, so whenever you are carrying stuff around the Black Zone and you need a strong defense, the Soldier Helmet is an excellent pick. It's also widely used in PvP and PvE content across many types of different content. It's used by tanks in group dungeons, it's used in solo PvP, it's used in group PvP. Basically, if you need a strong block, the Soldier Helmet is a really solid pick. The second helmet that makes for defenses is the Guardian Helmet, and this is actually a buff that not only affects you, but also allies near you. The Guardian Helmet makes for the Emergency Shield ability, which looks like this, and everyone that gets hit by it gets affected by the shield. Now the shield amount depends on whether the target is below 40% health or above 40% health, in which whenever they are below 40% health, the shield's amount is increased by an additional 50%. So this is a really good pick for both PvE and PvP whenever you are playing in a group especially, but it's also super viable when playing solo. Now aside from the shield it makes for, it also has an additional effect, which is that it cleanses all damage over time effects. Weapons such as the Cursed Tree or the Fire Tree have a lot of dots, so whenever you play the Mists and you encounter a lot of cursed users, you can consider taking the Guardian Helmet to get rid of their dots as well. The third defensive helmet in Albion Online is the Cleric Cowl, and I have to say straight away, the Cleric Cowl has a very niche use, because the cooldown on it is extremely long at 90 seconds. Now the Cleric Cowl makes for the Ice Block ability, which freezes you in ice and makes you completely immune to damage for 4 seconds. You can even use it while stunned or silenced, so you can use it in a very vulnerable state. However, the channel is uninterruptible, so once you use this ability, which looks like this, you cannot cancel it, unlike many other abilities in the game. So keep that in mind whenever you go about taking the Cleric Cowl, because it can actually backfire if you don't use it properly. Now, where do people typically use the Cleric Cowl? Currently, it's pretty much used in ZVZ content only, mainly by shot callers, and sometimes by very specific builds. So this is a very advanced item you don't typically take whenever going about filling your helmet slot. It's definitely not an item you want to take when doing PvE or when going about adventures solo, as all the other helmets will serve you much better. Then we have the Mistwalker Hood, which is the fourth helmet in the defensive list. The Mistwalker Hood makes for the Immortal ability. It simply makes it impossible for you to drop below 1 health once you activate this ability. You also become immune to all enemy transformation effects, such as polymorphs. Now, unlike the Cleric Cowl, if you wish to, you can deactivate this ability earlier. It looks like this, you recognize it by this insane gold aura, and it simply mimics the Tryndamere ult from League of Legends. Now, the Mistwalker Hood is an item that's typically used by certain DPS roles in ZVZ content, but it can certainly be used across many different builds, and I've seen it all the way from 1v1 up to the biggest ZVZ fights. It's mainly used in PvP, but I've also seen people be creative with it in PvE content, where tanks use this helmet instead of the soldier helmet to make sure they don't die when they pull a group of mobs. Up next, we have the 8th category, which are the helmets that make for buffs. We have the Hunter Hood, Knight Helmet, Royal Hood, and the Feyscale hat in this list. Starting with the Hunter Hood, we have one of the most important abilities you should definitely know about in the helmet slot, which is the Retaliate ability, which not only makes for a buff that increases your resistances, makes you tankier, but it actually reflects 85% of the incoming damage back at the attacker as magical damage. The visuals of it look like this, and it's one of the abilities you need to absolutely know about. I emphasize that because a lot of players keep hitting targets whenever they pop this ability, and they do a ton of damage back at themselves without even realizing where the damage comes from. Now, since this is a buff, it can be purged by something like the Helmet of Valor or the Fiend Cowl, so keep that in mind as a counterplay against this helmet. The Hunter Hood is an item you take for PvP specifically, and not really for PvE, and you typically take it for 1v1 type of content, such as the Mists and the Corrupted Dungeons, or perhaps when roaming in the open world. It is one of the strongest helmets out there for solo play, but typically you don't see it being used outside of solo play. The second helmet that makes for a buff is the Knight Helmet, and this ability is typically used in small scale content such as 20v20s, all the way to the biggest ZVZs in Albion Online. It's definitely not an item you need in PvE, and it's definitely not something you want to take whenever playing solo. Now, what the Knight Helmet makes for is a buff that affects up to 10 allies that makes them immune to forced movement effects for 6 seconds. The effect of it looks like this, and you can basically pass through abilities such as firewalls, wind walls, and everything else that's supposed to CC you. The third helmet that makes for a buff is the Royal Hood, and this one makes for a buff that increases your damage. Now, although that sounds pretty attractive, it isn't an item you typically take on your build. It has a very specific use case in that it's mostly used with very specific builds and in ZVZ content. Now, whenever you activate the Royal Hood, you stack up a damage buff that stacks up to 6 times, 1 stack every second, and once you cast an ability, it will stop stacking. So if you get only 2 seconds of stacks in, you will only get 2 stacks. Whereas if you continue, you can go all the way up to 6 stacks, after which it will give you the buff for an additional 5 seconds. So this ability can really make your clap way stronger, which is why you'll typically see it in big hitters such as the Wailing Bow. But outside of its niche use, you don't really use this helmet ever, so I don't recommend using this helmet unless you are playing a very specific build which requires the Royal Hood to hit harder. Then we have the fourth helmet that makes for a buff, which is the Feyscale hat. The Feyscale hat grants you immunity to all debuffs, and aside from that, it also makes all of your channels uninterruptible as long as the helmet's ability is procced. So normally, whenever you use the Vicious Barrage ability of the Siege Bow, it can be interrupted by something like Crowd Control or something like the Cowl of Purity, which interrupts spell casting. However, if you use the Feyscale hat, you cast your E then, you cannot be interrupted any longer. So the Feyscale hat has an ability that has a very specific use you only take with certain weapons and certain builds. Then for the final category, we have the Crowd Control helmet, starting with the Mercenary hood, which actually does more than just crowd control, but it's mainly about the crowd control it makes for. So the Mercenary hood has the Howl ability, and it does a bit of damage, it slows enemies hit, it reduces the damage enemies do, and it even interrupts enemy spell casting. So this helmet has a lot going on, which kind of explains why this helmet is used across various content in Albion Online, all the way from 1v1 to small scale content. Now, because the Howl ability does a lot of things at once, you can kind of pick and choose whenever you use it and for what kind of purpose you want to use it for. If the enemy has something that needs to be interrupted, you can save it for that purpose. If they don't have an interruptible ability, you can just use it for the slow or for the damage debuff it makes for. Therefore, the Mercenary Hood can be used in solo content, in group content, all the way to small scale content. It's typically an item you use for PvP content, but it certainly has PvE use cases as well. Then we have the second crowd control helmet, which is the Duskweaver helmet. The Duskweaver helmet makes for mobility through your helmet. It's a crowd control that sends out a spider's thread like this, and when it connects, you can use it again to move towards that target. So if you want extra mobility in your build, you can take the Duskweaver helmet. Now, the Duskweaver helmet is not an item you take for PvE, it's strictly something you take for PvP. You can take it whenever you go ganking, and it's used in solo PvP as well. But aside from that, you don't really see the Duskweaver helmet being used anywhere else. Then we have the Royal Helmet, which is a pretty popular helmet, makes for an AoE stun that can be cast from range. Now the Ballista support fire looks like this. It's a pretty big AoE that you can hit on multiple enemies at once, and anyone hit by it will get stunned. Now this is a helmet you take in PvP content all the way from solo up to 10v10, I would say. After that, the Judicator helmet, which I will cover next, kind of takes over. But before that, if you need access to an AoE stun through your helmet, this is the helmet you want to take. However, it's not something you take to PvE, as you typically don't need stun through your helmet in those types of content. Then you have the Judicator helmet, which makes for a stun as well. It has the electric discharge ability, which is one of the coolest looking abilities in the game, and it basically makes for a mini stun, a mini interrupt that can affect a lot of players at once. It looks like this. It basically starts from your starting location, and it makes for a huge AoE around you. The Judicator helmet is typically used starting small scale content all the way to DPZ content, so starting 10v10, 20v20 type of content, where you basically need an extra interrupt, an extra stun in your kit, and it's typically used by defensive tanks. You pretty much take this for PvP only, and you don't ever use this in PvE. Then we have the Hellion Hood, which makes for the Smoke Bomb ability, which silences all enemies within the pool, and you as well, and it also turns you invisible as long as you are within the pool. Now, invisible means that people cannot see you, but they can still damage you. So this is basically an AoE silence that can interrupt people who are casting abilities or stop them from casting abilities altogether. The Hellion Hood, although it has a very specific and very niche use case, can be used across a lot of different PvP content, and it's typically used starting small scale, starting 10v10, 20v20 type of content, all the way to the biggest ZVZs. And finally, we have the Demon Helm, which also makes for a silence, just like the Hellion Hood, except this one isn't AoE, it's not a pool on the ground, it's a crowd control that activates on your next auto attack whenever you use it. Looks like this, and your next auto attack basically silences whoever you hit. So if you want to have a silence in your kit that stops a single person from casting abilities for a certain duration, the Demon Helmet is where it's at. It's definitely not something you take for PvE content, it's strictly for PvP content, where it can be used in solo content, in smaller fights such as 2v2, 3v3 type of content, maybe 5v5, but outside of that, the Demon Helmet doesn't see much use at all. And with that, I went over all the different helmets in Albion Online. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a like, and make sure to share it with your newer friends who are unsure about what helmet to use in Albion Online. The amount of options can be very overwhelming, so I hope this video helped you figure out what helmet does what and when it's typically used. Let me know in the comments below if I missed anything about the different helmets, or if you have any additional questions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.